Hello, and welcome to the International Ombuds Association's Introduction to Embracing Conflict: How Ombuds Are Strategic Allies for Organizations. I am the president, Dr. Alicia Booker, and I'm joined here with President-elect Sarah Clapper and our executive director, Ellen Miller. The ombuds have a very unique role. We serve as confidential, informal, impartial, and independent support for constituents and organizations. What we do in this unique role is we listen, we hold space, we demystify policies, and we help individuals by doing conflict coaching or confidence coaching to how they can self advocate. We can facilitate conversations between two parties or large groups, and we can identify patterns that are taking place within the organization. We help and promote fairness. We help the group by improving trust and also help the group by doing some consensus building sometimes. All organizational ombuds try to practice according to our professional standards that we'll explain later in this presentation. What we don't do is manage any conflict or any policies or procedures beyond our office. We don't participate in investigations or produce findings to those investigations. We don't do corrective measures and we don't hold that space, nor do we create policy and maintain records. We are not a part of any formal process. However, we do have relationships with those that hold those spaces. We are not an office of notice, and we tell every visitor that when they come in. We're not a formal option like human resources or general counsel, nor are we DEI offices. But we do collaborate. We collaborate by exploring options and letting visitors know what those options might be. And Sarah will expand thought on how we do that.
Organizational ombuds are different than other types of ombuds, like classical ombuds, long-term care ombuds, media ombuds. And the way that we're different is that we practice by the standards of practice set by the International Ombuds Association. The four main pillars of our standards of practice are that organizational ombuds are confidential resources. We don't let anybody know who comes to see us or what we talk about. We provide a safe space. There are some limited exceptions to confidentiality in each organization. And one of the main ones is that we will have to take action if somebody indicates an imminent risk of harm to themselves or to others, or if there's a law that we have to maintain, such as in higher education, frequently people are required to report child abuse. But other than those limited exceptions, we're confidential offices. We're also informal. There are places inside our organizations or outside of our organizations to file formal complaints, but our offices are not authorized to receive formal complaints because we're not an office of notice for our organizations. Instead, we can help people get to the correct office or to the correct formal complaint process. So we're not actually duplicating the efforts of, as Alicia indicated, the Human Resources Office, ethics compliance, a Title IX office, anything like that. We're not duplicating those efforts. We are an informal option to help resolve or get people to the formal options. We're also impartial. We don't represent the visitor. We also don't represent the institution. We do not take sides. Instead, we listen, we lay out options, and we help people navigate systems. Finally, we're also independent. We report outside of the typical structures in the institution and in the organization. We traditionally, and by the standards of practice, report to the highest level of our organization. And we also report trends and concerns upward to leaders, either the highest level of the organization and also other decision makers throughout the organization. The Office of the Ombuds is really an office about relationships and building relationships and maintaining those between different other parts of the organization. So we do maintain relationships with human resources, compliance, ethics, general counsel, Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, any of those in all of those offices, because we're not a black hole of information. We genuinely work with others to improve systems And so while we do not advocate for individuals, we do advocate for fairness and equity in policy, process, and systems within an organization. And we complement the role of these other offices. So as opposed to an office that is a mandatory compliance reporting type office, we are confidential, but we act as a sounding board for visitors to our offices. We collaborate with those other offices on how to resolve situations with those other main compliance type offices in our organizations, but also other decision makers within the organization. We provide that upward feedback. We are very focused on fairness and equity and in the systems, and we identify those systemic issues for leaders and decision makers throughout the organization. Sometimes people do get concerned, especially if they're in a compliance office, about information that comes to the ombuds because they don't understand what happens when a visitor comes to our office. So let me share with you really quickly what that looks like. When a visitor comes to our office, our main goal is to listen to them so that they can be heard about their concern. Frequently, visitors to the office of the ombuds do not feel heard elsewhere in the organization, or they don't feel safe in sharing the information. So we listen, we actively listen, which also means we're listening for what the person is saying and what they're not saying, and we ask questions so that we can really try to assess where the person is in a process, if a process exists, and how best they can advocate for themselves, or we can help them through a process. So after listening and talking with them actively about their situation, we also then lay out options for them, from status quo, what's going to happen if you don't do anything about this situation, to informal options. Who do you need to talk to? What can that person, how can they help you with the situation? What do you need to say to them? How should you even approach that person or that office? And then we also talk with them about their formal options. This is really important, especially in a compliance type situation. Frequently, when people come to our offices, they do not want to report formally anything. They come in saying that I don't want to take formal action on this. I want to talk with you. But the reason that they don't want to file a formal complaint or take a formal action of any kind is because they are fearful, because they don't understand the process. They also don't understand how they will retain agency, control over their own situation through the process. So we as ombuds can walk them through, well, if you go to this office, this is what will happen. This is the intake process. This is how the investigator will proceed. These are some of the criteria that that investigation would be looking at. And where the visitor can perhaps step away from the process if they are feeling uncomfortable or like they don't want to participate anymore, and what will happen if they step away. We also talk with them about how they can access information. So even though you might talk with an investigator once, you can go back to them if you forgot something, if you need to add more information, if you need to clarify something. All of that is really important for people to understand the process. After a visitor meets with the Office of the Ombuds, most of the time, they're then willing to move forward either with talking with a support resource that is available to them through their organization, or to go through with talking with somebody at the formal compliance office.
So as you've heard and as you've seen, ombuds have many, many benefits that they'll bring to your organization. We've spent some time talking about risk mitigation, both from the legal perspective as well as brand perspective. Ombuds bring to the table a very different lens. Some of them may have a background of being a lawyer or a JD, but they're not bringing that lens to the conflict assessment or the coaching or how they hold space. It also helps create space in your organization to have clarity of roles. And we hear this all the time. Many general counsel are wonderful at settlement negotiations, and many HR professionals are wonderful at assisting people in their organizations and are wonderful people agents. But HR is there to represent the organization. And when you ask someone in an HR role to provide conflict coaching to one of the stakeholders in the organization, it can get confusing. So the clarity of role of having an organizational ombuds in place that can provide this safe space to process, to figure out, to gain agency, to really understand the options that are available, and then to get some conflict coaching as to how to address, or some support to facilitate conversation between individuals or between departments, is really quite extraordinary. So that's the support that they provide to visitors and departments, but the support that they provide to management and decision makers is really unbelievable. To be able to have your own built-in systemic awareness channel where you really get unfiltered information. It's allows you as the decision maker to figure out, what do you need to put in place to impact change? What do you need to, what policy or what training needs to happen to address fairness and to create transparency? Having the organizational ombuds also helps people be accountable, and also helps create additional skills so that you're really increasing the capacity of your audience and your organization. You have a built-in resource to assist in conflict. Not everybody loves conflict, and so it's wonderful to have trained professionals who are comfortable in the space of conflict and can help diffuse and help people navigate conflict. And it also really increases trust in the organization. Study after study shows now that the newer generations, what they want is transparency. They want to hear that decision makers have access to the information. They want to see the change that is being made as a result of having access to that information. And an organizational ombuds will assist you with all of that, and with all of the other collaborating departments every step of the way. In order to do that, we advocate for properly structured offices. I think we shared earlier in the presentation that organizational ombuds, they do follow standards of practice and a code of ethics that have been developed by the International Ombuds Association. Many of them are certified co-op practitioners, so they're certified of excellence in practice. And again, they have a unique, what we call a dual role, to both the visitor who sees them and to the organization as a whole. But in order for that to manifest and to work as well as it can, it's important to have a properly structured office, where an office is set up through either what we call a charter, that can be a policy, it can be a memo, it can be a memorandum of understanding. Really what it is it's a document that codifies the scope of what the office is, and that it would specify that the office is confidential, that it's impartial, that it's independent, and that it's informal. And it would also specify in the independence aspect who it reports to, because that's how the systemic change can be made when the ombuds is reporting both patterns and trends. So what does all of this mean in terms of the kinds of issues that come before the ombuds? We've spoken very generically, but the IOA does a practice survey every other year where we ask our members, who are organizational ombuds in a variety of sectors, in the K through 12 environment, in higher ed. Governments around the world have organizational ombuds, certainly in the corporate space and healthcare. Seeing a lot of ombuds in the scientific STEM environment. And what we see is pretty consistent information. So the kinds of concerns and complaints don't seem to be particular to one sector over another. The number one area of concern that's brought to the ombuds is around leadership and supervisory decisions and actions, disrespectful treatment, or somebody feeling disrespected. And when we look at the studies on retention, right, it takes so much more time to onboard an employee than it does to retain an employee. And when you have a situation of somebody feeling that they've been disrespected, or they have concerns with their supervisors, and quiet quitting is becoming such an endemic issue now, all of this is critical information for the organizational to have. But that's not it. We also see other very critical issues: harassment, performance, evaluations and grading concerns, safety, ethics, suicidal concerns. COVID unleashed a whole new set of workplace issues, both in terms of remote work environment, safety concerns in the workplace, how we return to school, how we return back to work, what that looks like, relationships and how people manage in hybrid. Is it appropriate that some people get to be hybrid, some people have to come back? All of those issues really pertain to and really address morale issues in the workplace. So further issues, scientific and research misconduct, gross negligence, whistleblowing. So these are very major concerns for your organization, and these are the kinds of issues that come before the ombuds. As we talk about the impact of confidentiality, I think Sarah really mentioned there's concerns, and we don't want people to misinterpret the role of confidentiality. Confidentiality is not a shield. It's a tool that the organizational ombuds effectively use when they work with visitors. And when we look again to our practice survey, we see some pretty powerful use of confidentiality to support navigating those issues within your organization. For example, 5/6 of the ombuds received permission from a visitor to use or transmit information without specifying who it was from. So they were given enough information to impact change. 2/3 received permission to use, 2/3 received permission to use information from a constituent identifying the actual source. Nearly half found some other way of communicating critical conversation, and more than a quarter found an effective way for a compliance office to find out the information itself. So you don't have to be concerned that because confidentiality is a critical aspect and foundational aspect of practice, that information will not make its way to the proper places to affect change. So thank you for being with us today and learning a little bit more about the impactful role organizational ombuds can have. We've developed a variety of resources for you, so feel free to go to our website at www.ombudsassociation.org, or feel free to contact me, our president, Dr. Alicia Booker, or President-elect Sarah Clapper. Thank you for joining us.